welcome to everyone. As I mentioned the other day, my best image of this conference is a journey that we all undergo, traveling through space and time, connecting different countries and different continents, and that's part of the excitement. I'm very grateful to all our viewers and participants who decided to join this endeavor and this journey. In particular, our 4 universities, which are working on the project and are interested in thinking about the future and about the integral human development. It's my great pleasure, really, to introduce our speakers at this panel. Sister Helen Alford, Vice-Rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum from Rome, Italy. I cordially welcome José Casanova, Professor Emeritus Senior Fellow at the Berkley Center of Religion, Peace and World Affairs at Georgetown University in the United States. Professor Clemens Sedmak, who's running the Nanovic Institute for European Studies at the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre. Clemens, welcome to this group. I'm very happy to welcome Liz Paslawsky, who's visiting professor at Ukrainian Catholic University, but eventually has a rich background in public health and in the corporate management. I'm welcoming also Oksana Kulakovska, who is director of the Analytical Center of Ukrainian Catholic University on this panel. And I just want to say that sadly, Professor Alois Buch won't be able to join us this time due to some unfortunate miscommunications and last-minute miscommunications on my part. But Professor Alois Buch is with us, and he's kind of working on preparing some kind of summary reflection, a summary report on the conference, on the referring to all the panels we were having during these 4 days. I'd be happy, as Notre has mentioned, well, the title of our concluding roundtable is "What We Must Do Next," and I deliberately want us to be somewhat kind of practical in our discussions and conversations and ideas which we express. And I think we can have luxury of being practical in this sense, since we had already 4 days of very refined and deep reflections. So there's an opportunity to have that luxury of thinking what shall we be doing after this conference, and I would be really happy somehow just to direct us in this direction of thinking practically. Well, let me just kind of offer just 2 brief remarks to start our conversation, and then I'd be happy to open the floor and hear from you, my dear colleagues. Well, my first question is, when it comes to what we must do next, is how do we define that the we word, the we part in that question? I think it could be fairly broadly defined. We could certainly mean or imply the whole humanity, which is that we could certainly kind of narrow that somewhat by thinking that we is really us. Academic community, professors, researchers, educators. We could also be thinking that we may also imply the partners of this conference, namely the Catholic universities. So I think that somehow it will be important just to keep all those kind of different components of the we idea for us. Don't lose sight of each one, but somehow I would really invite us to think what we as universities, at Catholic universities, so we as educators must be or can be doing in the future following up this conference and kind of building the future. This is one thing. The other thing which seems to be kind of very clear to me after the conference discussions which we had, I think that we could be kind of thinking of three kinds or types of environments we are kind of living through. And the first environment is very obvious one. This is nature. So I would refer to it as a kind of natural environment. Well, the second one is a social environment, kind of social reality we're kind of living through. And the third one, which kind of has emerged fairly recently, I would refer to it as a kind of digital environment. And I think that the tendency for us would be just to take all these three things for granted. And I think what is really needed is a kind of very thorough reflection on all three of them, namely within the natural environment we inhabit and the social environment which is built through our relationships and connections, where we can confront other people and other persons. And then very recent, very new digital reality, which is also taken for granted, especially if you think of the youngest generation who are high school students these days, who are digitally native, obviously, and they also take that kind of digital reality as kind of invisible thing taken for granted. And I think the COVID virus, it somehow kind of cut through all these environments in a kind of very peculiar way, and kind of underlying, kind of exhibiting issues, problems, and challenges related to the nature and kind of social milieu we kind of build and live through, and also kind of emphasizing some interesting moments about the digital environment, digital space we kind of foster and build here. Having said this, I'd like us first just to start this conversation by thinking of say one or 2 points which you would like to kind of highlight or to emphasize based on your panel discussions, or perhaps kind of referring to some other parts or events at the conference, so that we kind of refresh our discussion, our kind of roundtable menu with those kind of recollections. And let me maybe first start with you, Professor José Casanova. Since you just had a recent, you just completed a panel which you were kind of moderating with our colleagues from Georgetown University. Is there something that you would like just kind of to put on for us, for our consideration on this kind of roundtable menu? I'd like us to be fairly short in our comments, say, I know 2 or 3 minutes perhaps, so that we have, all of us have chance just to share our thoughts, ideas, or intuitions. Professor José Casanova, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Vlodko. 2 points. One, from the experience of having participated, not in every panel, but in many of the panels, I mean, the audience to watch the conference, the richness of the conference. And I think the richness because of the diversity of the structure of the conference and the inputs, the diversity of inputs. You remember, Vlodko, that once we were thinking how we are going to organize the panels, thematically mixing all the 4 universities, or actually as 4 different panels. I think this was very good because each panel brought a different perspective, different insights from different contexts, both physical context, but also intellectual context. So this is very important. And then the structure, the interviews, I think were very successful, added a lot of depth because they were 1-hour interviews, and this is a way of adding depth to what otherwise are too many different points. So, and again, the contribution of the students and so on. So I think that this was a format that was very good and that we can continue in the future even after the pandemic is over. It doesn't mean that we should not visit Lviv and be able to gather together, but nonetheless, this gives us a sense that this is something we can do and repeat in many different ways. The second point is the question that you have raised: what is to be done? The question of Volodymyr Lenin and Volodymyr Turchynovskyy. What is to be done? And here I want to again not to move too fast, because what is to be done is at the local level, at the local university, at the local context, and therefore there will be probably different things that we are going to do. But I think that we try to think again about the 4 principles of Catholic social action that have been incorporated by all Catholic social movements and which serve basically us very well. The first principle, observe, see, what's the reality. We need to be aware. And so what has the pandemic revealed to us? So this is very important. And so we have to see how these issues have been revealed to us in this conversation. The second is to discern, to evaluate. We need precisely this discernment to see what is the most important aspects, the way we can contribute as Catholic communities, as universities. And again, I think that our contribution probably is most important on the first level of observing, analyzing, sort of pointing out what the reality is. And then, of course, the third, to act, the praxis, the commitment. It could be accompaniment, it could be simply service, it can be really advocacy, basically linking. Again, I think that one of the things that are very clear is the need to organize networks, linkages where we can multiply our contributions by adding forces, both transnationally, translocally, and to all kinds of agencies. So these are my 2 points, my takeaways.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And let's move on. I would invite Clemens Sedmak for your comment or reflection.
Thank you so much, Volodymyr. I would also like to contribute 2 points from the panel on IHT and the education for moral agency. One is to quote the moderator is always a good move. So I was impressed by Volodymyr's point about solidarity not being a strategy, not being a technique. And this is such an important point to remember. It's much more about the spirituality, and it's not so much about technology. The way I read Laudato Si is that the Pope invites us to embrace a twofold transformation, to see the problems not as technical problems, but as moral problems. And secondly, not to see them as moral problems, but as spiritual challenges. And when you, Volodymyr, said that solidarity is something much deeper and much more personal than a technique that can be taught, that really resonated with me. I remember reading a book by Chris Warren and Don Schminke called High Altitude Leadership, where they ponder the question why 3/4 of the expeditions to the Mount Everest fail. And then they look into the reasons why those expeditions fail. And quite often a very well-equipped expedition fails because they trust in the technology much more than in their own abilities and judgment. That's where José's point about the importance to see and to judge comes in. And they have this little lovely phrase: a fool with a tool is still a fool. Meaning, if you give a lovely tool to a person who's not able to deal with it, it will be of no use. So that's one really key point for me. Solidarity is key for the future, but it's not a technique or strategy. The other point from the same panel I took from Tarash. Tarash quoted Robert Kennedy. And I like this text and I like this speech and the quotation, the gross national product does not include the beauty of our poetry, the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. That's a beautiful speech and a beautiful quote. And I think this conference with all these panels on IHT emphasizes this idea on, it's not about something that can be easily measured. It's about something that's much deeper, and this is what holds us together. So I think we feel invited to rethink our concept of standard of living vis-a-vis quality of life, or what I would call depth of life, where we may feel encouraged to even reduce the quality of life for a higher good. So these are two key points for me. Solidarity is not a technique, and we have to ask this question: what really counts, what really matters? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And well, Sister Helen, I would invite you to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the whole event. It's been such a wonderful event. I was thinking, because before, those of you who are just listening now, I can tell you that before Volodymyr sent us an email, those of us who are going to be in the panel, thinking about questions, and the first one coming up, and the phrase that to me when I was trying to, I would look at the videos afterwards, is speak to power, but start from vulnerability, or something like speak to the center, but start from the margins, something like this. I feel this was a message that was coming across. For instance, I really was struck in the Notre Dame panel by the anthropologist, Kat Bolton, I think her name is, and what she was saying about the structural violence and, you know, listening to people who've been subjected to that sort of thing and bringing them into the conversation. And I think it connects a lot with what Pope Francis has been saying for a long time about going to the margins and getting the smell of the sheep and all those kinds of wonderful images. You've already used some other great images. And I think also we've seen that partly in the panel we had talking about technological captivity. I think partly in what Joe is going to be doing this evening on his wonderful thing about attention grabbing versus value giving media. We sort of find ourselves a bit in this world between a sort of incredibly powerful set of tools, of central people, and this huge also penumbra, this margin, which is really big and involves all kinds of people and whole parts of the world. And we're confronted with these two things. But I wouldn't want to set up too much of a dichotomy, because I think, as we all know, there's a lot of vulnerability in the corridors of power. And people in the business world feel it, politicians feel it, lots of powerful people feel it. And so I think, to pick up this other word that you've just been talking about so far, solidarity, you know, I've been thinking a lot about it because we've had a series of sessions at the Angelicum 40 years on from the solidarity movement, and people have been giving a lot of different perspectives on that. And one of the things that came out was John Paul's idea about solidarity and how it was such a challenge to previous ideas. And of course, it's coming out of Catholic social thought, but he formulated in an especially powerful way, not solidarity of one group against another, workers against employers, even if they had real justification to feel like that, and in some senses, in some practical levels, may have needed to organize themselves like that. But much more a solidarity which is overarching, which is workers and employers, which is, as one of our Polish speakers in this series of talks said, shipyard workers with the communist apparatchiks together, who had been so, you know, oppressing people before. And, you know, if we think about solidarity in Poland 1981, if we think about the revolution of dignity in Ukraine, if we think about 2020 in Belarus, Hong Kong, so many places, it's starting out of vulnerability, that sense of solidarity, but it's also opening up to others. And a key idea of solidarity in this sort of Christian social thought area is a sense of bearing each other's burdens, solidarity being about that. That's also connecting us with vulnerability, but vulnerability across the board. So to me, there's this sort of two things, really. There's a power game with the powerful and the weak, and we need to address the powerful from the position of the weak, but there's also this sense of shared vulnerability, which the pandemic, of course, has brought very much to the fore, and shared solidarity, because there's vulnerability everywhere. And we can build this solidarity across these divisions as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I would invite Oksana Kulakovska now just to share her reflections. And Oksana, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. I'm with you. Good morning and good afternoon, actually, good evening, dear colleagues. Wonderful to be here, a great honor. And actually, I would be in a much better position listening to wonderful insights and great thoughts during this conference. And what I can share, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, is a bit different takeaways from our panel, the framing conversation, which was represented by people from different areas, leaders from different areas. That all recognized, and this is the first takeaway important for me, that trust is a quality of equal societies. It's important, especially now when we are talking about inequality. And with phrasing inequality, the level of trust is declining critically. Well, actually, the member of the parliament, two businessmen, the person who is working in strategic communication and with international public campaigns, they all recognize that we see an enormous inequality in access to resources, which means that rich will become richer and the poor will become poorer. This actually, well, the pandemic actually is fueling this divide, which undermines the society. So the big question is how to balance the model and how to introduce the new model of sustainability to both businesses and the countries. The second takeaway, important for me, is the necessity of supporting small businesses. Because actually small businesses, there is less and less space to realize freedom in business. As Peter Thiel mentioned recently, that the market is not enough, because the market is actually not about winning the competition. The market is about the monopoly. And we see recently what a great influence big companies have on politics and different areas of our life and the society as a whole. That's why it is very important to support small business, but the big question is how to do that without drowning into this Orwell world, you know, where everybody should be the same. And that's, again, the question that all the panelists from the framing conversation were addressing to. And important thing that was raised also, that we need to incorporate ethics and questions of the human and culture into business and the governance of all level again. And the good actually, what was enlightening in this was something that Mr. Hunter was mentioning, that they, as an American Chamber of Commerce, were doing an internal questionnaire and research. And the big shift in the mindset and the big change that they observed during this survey was that 130 CEOs of American businesses recognized that the important things that they are working on now is trust, empathy, unity, support, and communication, something that they never put as a main task, as a leading leading strategic goals for their businesses. So I'll probably stop now.
Well,
thank
you, Oksana. I mean, all these are kind of wonderful, I think, very, very, very deep thoughts that we're kind of hearing. And these, I invite you to share your thoughts on the matters we are beginning to discuss.
I listened to a range of speakers throughout the conference, and one of the things that was coming up all the time is the question, what does it mean to be human? And I can't stress enough that how we actually define that is extremely important in the way we move forward, because we have had a society that traditionally has defined our humanity by looking at us intellectually. From a point of view, when you look at the industrial age, the technological age, I'm very much involved in digital technology with the pandemic, where I'm working with hospital CEOs, mentoring them. And again, it's always about what we can do to improve our intellectual capacity. The problem we have if we do that, and when we see that with the young, you know, we're doing social media, we're doing different communication platforms, is that we're missing the core essence of who we are. And the core essence of who we are involves our emotions. It involves our feelings. It involves everything related to the heart. Now, the reason this is so important now is because this conference is talking about empathy, trust. We're talking about interconnectedness. We're talking about morality. They are all feelings and emotions. We have to feel them. We're actually building a society where we're not encouraging people to talk about their feelings or to understand their feelings. I don't know one CEO in the corporate world who has not sort of said to me, I don't do emotions, or I only do emotions that work for me at work. We actually don't have a vocabulary where people can understand and say it is okay to feel emotions. If we cannot feel our own emotions, how can we expect others to feel or emotions in others? So I think what we need to do is look at it from the context that the definition of humanity includes our emotive side as well as our intellectual side. If you look at corporate and even small businesses, you know, as all the speakers are saying, you know, we've gone from the days where we're talking about just finance competition. We are talking about trust. We're finding that people are looking, not only the people who work in the organisation, but people who buy from the organisation. They're looking at, you know, how they are looking after nature, how they're looking after social environment. So I really believe that the university environment can be an enormous leader in being able to help them build that bridge between what they previously did, which was all about money, to a new environment which talks to a broader context. But before we do that, you know, the university environment has to start talking a lot more about emotions and feelings and encourage that as part of our definition of humanity. Thank you, Volodymyr.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much. I mean, these are very, very, very rich reflections that we are kind of hearing from all of you. I'm trying to kind of work on some kind of my kind of summary, which would be a difficult thing to do, but I'm hearing very interesting ideas and concepts. It's certainly trust and solidarity seem to be kind of at the very heart of our conversation, at least over the last half an hour that we are having. And then Clemens, you mentioned depth versus quality of life. I mean, that I thought was kind of very interesting idea or concept to explore. And Sister Helen, you mentioned that phrase that we probably should speak to the center, but we should probably start from the margins and somehow just kind of develop that capacity of looking at the margins and probably hearing the margins in order also to be able to communicate with the center. And I'm kind of hearing a very similar idea in what Liz and Oksana was mentioning, and giving examples of CEO who were kind of very much eager to kind of explore those ideas connected with the feelings, with the heart, with the compassion, with kind of sympathy, which isn't their kind of daily business, and they're kind of eager to know and learn more about that. José, you mentioned about the idea of kind of strengthening networks and the concept that we should be developing our capacity to observe, to discern, to accompany. So all that, I think that all kind of bring us really to the need of understanding what human being is. I mean, what stands behind the idea of humanity. Well, I would really be kind of very much interested in maybe let's pursue some of these kind of.
And then she goes through some of the history of philosophy, and she's worried about, look, if you meet my daughter, she may not check many of those boxes. Where reason is a prominent candidate, agency is a prominent candidate, self-determination is a prominent candidate. She may not check many of these boxes, but if you have this encounter, it's very obvious and clear that she is human. And so I think this question, what does it mean to be human, is not a question that can be dealt with, you know, in roundtable discussions like ours or at the desk. It's based on encounter and a second-person perspective. And whatever we can do as universities to encourage that kind of experiential learning and encounter. And then Taras in the chat talked about Ukrainian experiences of solidarity. I think that would be very important and worthwhile. And that brings me to this question of the depth of life. Caring for a severely disabled child does not increase your quality of life. It's not something that would increase your quality of life in terms of I'm a little lonely, so I need a pet, or I'm not comfortable, so I need a better furnace in my house. It's on a different level. It gives you depth, but it comes with sacrifice and also pain. The same if we take care of aging parents. The same if we are committed to a cause that asks us to get up early in the morning or have disrupted sleep at night. This is not what we normally mean by quality of life. It's something different. And to give an example from the German-speaking context, Inge Jens, famous scholar of the equally famous and spouse of the equally famous Walter Jens, took care of her spouse once he was diagnosed with dementia around his 80th birthday. And in a book, she is very clear about this did not increase my quality of life. The opposite is the case. It made it harder for me to say yes to life. But what I'm committed to, and the question is not how can I increase my quality of life, it's something else, it's steps of life. And I think giving this message to the people we work with and to try to live it out ourselves, that what counts in life may not be even measured in terms of quality of life, could be an important paradigm shift, because what we need to do, I'm afraid, is degrowth and not growing, but degrowth, and you have to find some motivation to do that, and that's normally not to be found in quality of life ideas. So that would be my response, Volodymyr. I don't know whether you're happy with that, but thank you.
Excuse me. I was I had to unmute myself. Yeah, thank you so much for that comment. I'd like also to move forward by really kind of asking a question about that center and power, which Sister Helen in her reflection, and how shall we talk to the center and to the power? What's behind that idea? How we can kind of think of that of the dialogue, assuming that as you mentioned. Speaking of center and power, I mean, they also have their own kind of vulnerability. So, I mean, vulnerability is part of our human condition in life, right? So, I mean, probably we cannot divide ourselves by saying those that are vulnerable and those who are not vulnerable, who have developed immunity to certain vulnerability. Again, what kind of idea is behind that? Talking to the or speaking to the center and speaking to those who are power or those who are with power.
Do you want me to say something about this, Volodymyr?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, if I can draw a bit on what we did in the panel on from technological captivity to new freedom, I think I'd start with, you know, what are the dominant factors in society? And I think, as I said in that panel, the dominant discourse is an economic discourse. And we can see that because we're all measured in economic ways. And we all have to reach a standard, which is defined by that. And what Clemens just said shows what problematic situations it can produce for us. I was recently also in a conference, an online conference with the Warsaw School of Economics, and there was a really interesting researcher there talking about Girard and Girard's using Girard's idea to analyze capitalism, and kind of showing that capitalism is a kind of a religion, because if you think about the problem of mimetic desire and how we want to, we often want what others want because that seems to be the good thing. That's a very, very normal structure operating in social systems. And we can often use violence to get it. And so how do we deal with the kind of violence that arises from mimetic desire? And we have different ways of dealing with it historically. One is to have a kind of moral system. So if you look at the 10 Commandments or things like that, often they're dealing with desires like this and trying to put them under some control. We can have rituals which try to deal with it. We can have the scapegoat kind of ritual. We can have the carnivale kind of idea where you just try and blow out, get rid of this tension, kind of transgressive kind of moments that kind of help people deal with this. Or you have the capitalistic answer, he says, which is get rid of the problem. Everybody can have everything they want. You know, there is no problem with mimetic desire anymore. And that sort of really reinforces economics as this dominant model. If you think we see it as a sort of get out of jail free card, a sort of way of getting out of these big problems which society had to deal with before. If we just promise everything to everybody, we can sort of get rid of the problem. And it's a really attractive thing and does have some benefits for us. You know, it's not all bad. So, so I think all this kind of anthropologically, lots of other ways, it's pushing economics to be the dominant discourse in our society. It deals with a lot of problems we have today. And so that puts economics in a very powerful position. And technology as a kind of tool, which is very, very important in the economic system, becomes also equally central and equally important. And so I think, how do we speak to those people? Well, one of the things is to recognize, as has already been said here, this shared vulnerability here, and that we can build solidarity, and that, you know, Google engineers, James Williams talks about this in his book, Stand Out of Our Light. No engineer joins Google with the idea that he wants to work on, or she wants to work on, an adversarial technology that is going to be gradually breaking down our capacity to concentrate on anything serious. But that's what they end up doing because of the economic system that they're in. So they feel bad about it often. A lot of people in big businesses feel bad about what they're doing. They don't want to be doing those kinds of things, but they don't see any other solution. They think there is no alternative, to use Mrs. Thatcher's phrase, Tina, you know, there is no alternative. There's only this way of doing it. Now, the green thing and the environmental thing has raised some questions about that. The sustainable development goals, which a lot of businesses are trying to integrate into their strategies now, has started to raise some questions about that. And also we begin to see more and more in the business world willingness to talk about vulnerability. Luigi Bruni has some interesting things about this, where he talks about how we've tried to develop in the economic world through just treating people as business partners, as people who are just people we're transacting with. We don't have any, talking what Liz was talking about, any emotional connection with them or anything else that goes beyond just the pure business. We've created a world of immunity because we become immune to vulnerability instead of community. Now, of course, if we try to build community, we have to accept vulnerability. These other people are going to hurt us. It's not going to be great all the time, as anybody who's in a marriage or any other kind of community knows about. So we have some common shared vulnerability that we can maybe reach. And as some people have already said, this pandemic has cut across some of the problems that we had before and has brought to the fore some sense of shared vulnerability. We don't know where it's going to go because some people have carried more of this vulnerability than others. But there is a sense, at least for now, a kind of window of opportunity of this experience of vulnerability. That window will shut down not too long from now, but we have it at this moment to do something with it. And I think the other thing is speaking to people's mindset. You know, I tried to use that phrase in the panel, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. You know, the big power player people in this world have certain theories about how the world works, you know, and a lot of them are pretty distorted theories. I mean, John Maynard Keynes has this wonderful idea that most practical people, if you scratch the surface of them, what you find is that they're working on the theories of old economists that died 30 years ago, but they think they're practical people and they don't have any ideas which are influencing what they're saying. So to deal with people's ideas, and that's where I think universities can be really, really liberating forces in societies, to have this intellectual charity, as Rosmini, you know, the great Italian thinker from the 19th century said, intellectual charity is the highest form of charity, he called it. You know, to set people free, to give people the freedom of ideas that can help them really live a full human life. You know, I think that's also a crucial part of what we need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for bringing up those issues. And José, I would really kind of invite you to share your thoughts or reflections on the things of you know, vulnerability, community. We kind of naturally, I think, are moving toward the education. I mean, the business we are all in, and the major question would be, in a way, well, what we as educators are kind of are willing or can do about this, but maybe kind of moving towards that question still. What's your take on that kind of vulnerability, dependency, community issues which we are discussing now?
Well, first, as educators, our first task is to find the truth. And our task is to speak truth to power. And truth, basically, the pandemic has revealed two fundamental truths. One, the one that's stressed by Pope Francis, is we are all in this together. We are all in the same boat. That's what he said. But then the image that came out from our conversation today is the image that Catherine put. Yes, we are all facing the same storm, but we are facing the same storm with very different boats. Some of us are cruising through the ocean, through the storm, in ocean liners, in tankers. Others are truly vulnerable, almost drowning. And so our task is to realize the vulnerabilities revealed by the pandemic. And there are four types. First class, the knowledge class, people like us are cruising through the ocean. We are even wealthier now than we were before because we are not spending money. We have not lost our jobs. So the rich are richer today than they were a year ago, all of us. Second, vulnerability, age. The elder and the young has been most affected by this. They have lost their schools, they have lost their lives. Third, those groups who have been discriminated always, whether because of ethnic, race, religion, whatever, are the ones most vulnerable and suffering more disproportionately than others. And fourth, gender. Women are disproportionately adversely affected by the pandemic. They are basically carrying the burden of care at home, in hospitals, everywhere. They are the ones to lose their jobs, the ones that are basically losing their careers, and they are also affected by violence at home. So these things, we have to speak truth to power and recognizing the facts. The truth is the most important task of us educators.
Thank you. Thank you. And Oksana, would you like somehow just to pick up on some of the thoughts that we just expressed here and kind of share your comments with us?
Yes. Of course, an interesting discussion, and I will start with a positive thing. In the recent 2020 Edelman Trust Barometer Special Report about trust and coronavirus, there was one indicator. About 71% of respondents mentioned that those companies that will continue to put profit as their ultimate goal and not people and their welfare will lose their trust. So I believe that it's also our responsibility, I mean, all of us, all people, what we expect from those who have power. And here I just reflect a bit about what we were talking about previously, about how we can influence the power. It's us who communicate what we expect from them, what our expectations are, what our demand is. Because the businesses now are reacting actually on what their young employees are expecting from them. Business actually, those who have better access to the resources like money and markets, of course, they become richer these days. Other businesses, small and medium businesses, are suffering from inequality. This is one thing. Another thing is because they are much more vulnerable from the point of view of people who are coming to work in those businesses. I remember talking to a friend of mine who is living in San Francisco, and he's working in tech business, actually. And what tech business is facing now, and I'm talking about medium-sized companies, that the specific of their model and their operation is a project-based. Many people are working online, so they don't have this kind of feeling and emotion of unity being one team offline. And they are losing actually a motivation to work. And it's a huge problem how to keep young people motivating within business. One of the panelists, Volodymyr, I believe, mentioned that people not just need money, but function. I would add that people need meaning. They need to understand their personal mission. And if the business is not communicating this meaningfulness of their involvement in what they are doing, people will be leaving that business. And the labor market is, on one hand, is suffered from rapid digitalization. On another hand, there is a high demand for high quality, for competent employees. So I believe it's also our responsibility. Are we ethical? Are we competent in order to influence those powers? And do we pay taxes? And actually how we can build our resilience, our personal resilience. I believe that also task for us.
Well, thank you, Oksana. I'm looking at the chat, and Taras Dobko is kind of making a comment or kind of turning our attention to the whole issue of citizenship. and in public space, and maybe let's just kind of have a few comments on this. So I would really love to ask Liz as to how we should be thinking about our kind of role as the citizens, and in which way that might be or is kind of important to the integral human development and development in general, by the way.
So a couple of points. The first one, yes, everyone around the world is feeling extremely vulnerable in a range of complex areas. The positive that's coming out of that is, for the first time globally, everyone's going introspective. Everyone's looking at what provides them meaning and purpose. So I agree very much with what Helen said. We have a window of opportunity because everyone is looking for meaning and purpose. When we're talking about capitalism and the corporate environment, the phrase that I use a lot is that we need to start talking about the new currency. Our old currency was totally focused on money and making profit, return to shareholders, or providing enough income for us to provide our meals to our family at all levels. The new currency is much broader than that. We are, as one of the speakers talked about, we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals now, but we're actually seeing that climate change is actually helping also, in that it is providing a new currency. It's saying that we need to start to look at our natural environment as part of the currency in how we're trying to develop our business. Let's try to get zero emissions. Let's try to do more recycling. What can we do to support the environment? So it's asking, the new currency is asking a whole range of new questions. And with those new questions, everyone as a consumer is actually demanding companies are moral, they are more transparent in what they do, and we can actually see that what they're actually doing is morality. So we've got so many new drivers coming from the pandemic, but also before the pandemic, that we're actually in an environment, in a global environment now, which is demanding a new currency. And I think the role of the university could be to really flesh that out and to actually support business, to support industry, and to support particularly government policy in how to develop that further. There was a really interesting point also said by one of the speakers that when we're trying to encourage people to keep their staff, to keep their employees, and particularly the younger millennial age who are very easily looking for other jobs when the current job isn't suiting them, we actually have to look at what is in all of us, our biological drive. And there's only 3 biological drives that we all have universally. The first one is that we need to feel safe in the environment. And what is that definition of safety? It is more than just having food on the table. It is an environment where we feel that what we're doing is doing good rather than bad. The second biological drive we all have is to be loved and to feel loved. And I think one of the things that businesses are struggling now is to understand what that means. But it's all about respect, treating people as individuals. I hear a lot of debate about group thinking, group teamwork. The problem with group teamwork and group thinking is that unless we empower the individuals to be themselves, it's going to be very hard for them to be team players because they don't feel empowered. So we need to look at that very issue. But the third biological drive is what Oksana said. We are born with a drive to find meaning and purpose. And that meaning and purpose, everyone is looking for it at the moment. What is providing my meaning and what is providing my purpose? And for the first time in history, we're not saying a new computer, a new iPhone. we're not talking about the capital side of what provides our meaning and purpose. The pandemic has said much more, that meaning and purpose is answering the questions, how do I want to live my life? And I think the new currency is something that the universities all should be looking at to provide leadership. I see the universities, I work in the corporate sector and I work at UKU and a number of other universities. I'm a bridge builder between the universities and the corporate world. I think the universities in themselves today can be bridge builders between the academic environment, the learned environment, and the gaps that we currently have in society that everyone is looking for the answer, and that is looking at the new currency. Thank you, Volodymyr.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, that's very interesting discourse of new currency, and I'm also reading the comments from Notre, for example, who's thinking, well, what about health? Maybe this is becoming a new currency as well. Someone might be kind of tempted to think, well, maybe dignity is a new currency along these lines. Well, that maybe now move to the kind of university world, and maybe more specifically to our university, the Catholic universities world, and how that kind of rich context which we were kind of describing with you. How can we be working with this, and what can be done at the universities at the times we live through? And I'm thinking, for example, just kind of to start that discussion, I'm thinking that we are very much used to the language of values over the last decade or so. Everyone seems to be using that language of values. What I'm not hearing as much, and I might be wrong in this, and please correct me if I do, I'm not hearing that much the language of virtues. I think these two moments, namely the values and virtues, they shall be going in parallel somehow. I mean, my thinking is that you develop your virtues by somehow being able to consistently value what's valuable and respond to values, and that's something different from being able to define your own set of values, say on every Monday, or with every new year, for example. And again, I mean, that brings me also to the whole issue of universities and Catholic universities, and something that you, Sister Helen, mentioned as liberating force, meaning the university education. So how is that force actually working, and how can we possibly be thinking of educating for solidarity, for example, or for that truth-seeking attitude, and if that would, I suggest that with this we may be moving towards some practical. Shall we have some practical ideas or suggestions as to how we might be fostering our partnership, or we're just sharing some good practices that we are developing at our universities. Clemens, maybe let's start with you.
Thank you, Volodymyr, and thank you, dear panelists, for all your insights. I take notes and I really learn a lot. When Volodymyr said now we need to be practical, I was a little worried. That's not where I shine. But I could offer two thoughts. One is I have this project called Humanizing Institutions, thinking about how can we build dignity-centered institutions that do not humiliate, that show proper respect and appreciation for people. And I think the universities should role model that, being dignity-sensitive or dignity-literate institutions where respect, non-humiliation is at the core of what we do and how we interact, which could be also something like a general studies program where no student should get away with not having heard about these kinds of issues, with concrete examples, because I would like students to graduate from the university with a deep-seated sensitivity towards institutional negotiations of power and also dignity violations. because institutions are the mediaries between the individual and the society. And investing in a sense of what good institutions look like, I think is not a misplaced investment. So that's one point. Role model, and concretely that means mapping entry points for humiliation in the university, asking the different stakeholders in a university whether they feel properly respected, not only students, not only faculty, not only staff, also those who are cleaning our rooms, those who cook our meals. The pandemic also helped us rethink this distinction between essential and non-essential. A few years ago, we had these extremely low temperatures in South Bend, Indiana, and the university closed for 3 days. The dining halls had to remain open because of the students on campus. And then the dining hall workers were deemed essential, not the provost, not the president, not the faculty. It was the dining hall workers. And then so giving students a sense of this is a dignity literate institution, and fostering this kind of research, teaching, but also experiences, I think is my first point. The second point is, my impression is, at least in the US-American context, and here I'm speaking as this innocent, neutral Austrian, where we don't have a strong tradition of private universities. My sense in the US-American context is universities bought into the normal capitalist neoliberal university business system. So we have business people who sit on our boards. The trustees of the University of Notre Dame are business people. The chairperson is a business person. And I haste to add, there's nothing wrong with business people, but they would have a natural inclination to say growth. So growing the endowment is what we need to do. And the development office with, 250 employees here at Notre Dame, they make a number of decisions and have a lot of power. And I sometimes wonder, if we took our Catholic mission, for example, Mark 1:15, which seems to be one of the oldest passages in the Gospels, maybe very close to the verba ipsissima, the kingdom of God is at hand, repent and believe in the good news. If we took that seriously, what would that mean for our growth models? What would it mean if a Catholic university decided we will not grow anymore? We will not grow our endowment anymore. We will change the paradigm. I know this is completely naive, but just the fact that it sounds naive from a prophetic point of view, I think. And you all know the Grand Inquisitor, and you all know, the idea of Jesus coming back to earth and the church people being disappointed by Jesus who disrupts their routines. And in a course a few years ago, I asked the students, what if Jesus came back to campus, walked right into the main building of Notre Dame, into President John's office, and what would Jesus say? That was the assignment. What would Jesus say to President Jenkins? And it was interesting to see that a number of students said that Jesus would be a little critical of the way Notre Dame is developing. And I think having this as a question, because look, Volodymyr, we try to encourage students, be humble. We try to tell them less is more. We try to tell them, well, don't be greedy. But the universities don't model that. We are investing in growth. We see our peers in universities that are banks with a little bit of faculty teaching attached. And I think that's something where a Catholic university could make a difference. And going back to José's point, I feel very privileged, and I am not sure whether I'm willing to make the sacrifices necessary for this paradigm shift. But as I said before, degrowth is something that's not just a slogan, but a practice. And to think carefully about what could that mean for the prophetic mission of the university, putting God at the center in the idea of, it's about the kingdom of God. It's not about growing your endowment. And it's too cheap and easy to say the more money we have, the more good we can do. That's too cheap and too easy. And then asking those hard and deep questions, I think, could be a good contribution. So dignity literal institutions on the one hand, and thinking about degrowth on the other hand would be my 2 points.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And José, if I may ask you somehow just to respond to these ideas. I mean, institutions and then universities, endowments, the less is more thing.
I feel a bit uncomfortable talking so much about capitalism in this session. I really think that the most insightful political economists today, understanding what contemporary capitalism is our Pope Francis. The problem of capitalism today is not the exploitation of labor. The problem is not how it treats its employees, how to keep them happy. The problem is the discarded half of humanity. Capitalism today doesn't need half of humanity, neither as consumers nor as labor power that can be exploited. And unless we face this issue, that capitalism doesn't need half of humanity, then I don't know how we can face what capitalism means.
Sister Helen, where universities are in all this picture which we just outlaid, how do you see this?
Okay, well, I'm really glad we're talking about this, because this is, I think all of us on this panel who are in universities, we're feeling a bit uncomfortable now. We're a bit squirmy in our seats, but we should be feeling uncomfortable because, I mean, we need to do a bit of a mea culpa, all of us, you know, and that's where we grow from. That's why we have the examination of faults at the end of the day, you know, not to depress us, but to see tomorrow we can do something better. So we need to have a sort of realistic appraisal of where we are. You know, I'm in a Pontifical university, so we have a lot of problems. They're a little bit different from the ones at the Catholic universities in the United States. And in some respects, I think we have the danger of feeling a bit self-righteous and superior to what's going on in the Catholic university in the United States, when we should be absolutely aware of our own problems. I mean, I think Clemens has talked about what could be a real challenge for Catholic universities in the United States. I mean, I think our problem here in Rome, or from the ecclesiastical universities, is a sort of, well, I suppose it does go back to clericalism, but it's a sort of inability to really work with each other, a sense of wanting to keep control of what belongs to me, and that becomes smaller and smaller and more sterile and less life-giving. And of course, we do have some kind of reactions to that, but it's a really, really deep problem for us to deal with. And I think also the whole question of women in this system is really still to be faced up to. The role also of lay people in this system, it hasn't really been fully faced up to. Now, you know, things here, I suppose, do tend to move more slowly and incrementally, and there are incremental changes. That's true. So it's not all, it's a sort of glass half full, glass half empty problem as well. But I think we should really ask ourselves some tough questions, as Clemens has been saying. I suppose on a more positive note to do with what we could do in our network and our universities, I think the kind of collaboration which has been so well modeled, to use that good word that Clemens was using, by UKU, and it's great to see this part of the world setting the lead. I think we'll see this more and more in the future. There's huge resources in Central Eastern Europe that are still to be discovered and really to come to the fore. And so it's great to see UKU's already doing that. So I think some kinds of research modeling, some sharing of students, some research where we deal with the kinds of crises that we're facing, but also we're trying to do it in a way which promotes solidarity, so that solidarity is the outcome and also the way to get there. I think this is crucial for us. And yeah, I think that's what all I'll say for now. Obviously, listening to other people makes me think of other things, so I'll cut there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Something that Clemens has mentioned. Well, I'm thinking of Foucault, and we still can remember days when the university was started here back in 1994, and I'm usually thinking about the first students of this university who entered this place with no brand, no space, no faculty actually, and that was like a very courageous, I would think, a move on their part, and without them, without their kind of commitment, it would be difficult. It would be impossible, in fact, just to build the university. And I think this is so much kind of critical. I mean, that atmosphere of kind of solidarity, of partnership in building and developing certain project is really very, very important. And I mean, to what you, Clemens, were referring, I mean, we are kind of building a new campus, and I think you are trying to do it to the best possible level. I mean, you build those kind of buildings and classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. They can be very comfortable. They can very, very much kind of appealing, and you do really want to have like the best possible quality to offer to the students. And it seems like that will be the paradigm to move, right? I mean, you just you just invest your best resources and opportunities in what you're doing. But then the question remains, how does that kind of impact or influences our students' attitudes, and to which extent that what kind of atmosphere that builds? And I'm not really kind of complaining, but I can imagine that that someone who was looking at the Lviv Theological Academy at that time and what they saw is really kind of dramatically different from young people today who are kind of visiting our campus and seeing what they see. And my question to them would usually be, what kind of commitment and sacrifice? Are you ready for some kind of sacrifice? I mean, comparable in intensity, if I can put it this way, when it comes to your studies at this fairly modern developed university. I mean, the danger, I think the real danger would be if this would be just customers kind of selecting and picking up. And so with the kind of attitude that I pay, you deliver, and that would be it. I mean, there's got to be something more. And so I think that's something which we're kind of consistently are kind of reflecting upon as to how we build that attitude when the luckily, I would say, I mean, the environment is changing, and we're kind of progressively becoming more also in that kind of material or financial sense. So that's a real challenge. That's where I think the mission of the university, and then something with what you were going to mention, kind of paradigm shift. What is that paradigm? And we are kind of having 21st century here and now, and that's a big I think challenge for us to think and to reflect. Let me ask you if someone would kind of like to add something or to this conversation. Please feel free to do so. In the meantime, let me also say that if there are some questions from the audience, from those who are viewing our conversation, yes, please kind of write them down, and we'd be happy also to address them as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if there's a comment, please go ahead.
Yeah. Volodymyr, going on to your point, I think the way we teach at universities now has to change. When we're talking about the difference between virtues and values, quite often when people are talking about values in a work environment, they go to a particular work environment or even to the university, and they're shown a set of values. And they sound good and they look good and they go, yes, we do that. But I'm finding so many people now have not internalized the values. It sort of, yes, they sound right, that's great. We can try to mesh our behaviours towards them. But then they go to work and they get a new set of values. Then they go to another part of society, they get a new set of values. So, the values are changing all the time. Virtues do not change. Virtues are something that is inherent within us, and to mesh the virtues and the values together, I think is the best way to do it is through the experiences of our students, the experiences. So we need to actually help them walk into a set of values that is going to, and a set of virtues that is going to stay with them throughout their life. Because every environment is going to be talking about a new set of values. They need to understand it from how they experience it within themselves. And that is, again, an emotional feeling. And so I think we have to start looking at our teaching methods to make sure that we involve more experiences in how people are feeling and, you know, what's driving their meaning and purpose outside the university life that actually creates their values.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say? That wasn't very clear. I apologize.
Well, I'm seeing a comment posted by Joseph, by Joel Linsley, Sister Helen, which is on the project that you are working on with your colleagues at the Angelicum. If you would like to comment on this, perhaps please feel free to do so.
Yes, thank you very much, Volodymyr. We have this program called CRISIS, which is an acronym for Christian Responses in Solidarity to Crisis. And it has a number of projects in it, and two of them have open calls at the moment. One is on invisible migrant workers, visible human rights, with the idea being that the pandemic has made visible the work that migrant workers are often doing, which are often these essential jobs that Clemens was talking about. And this is a chance to raise the question about their human rights. So that there's a conference that will be held and a volume that will be published. And so there's a call for people to participate in that. And then we also have another call that is open on responding to the pandemic as a systemic crisis. The economy of Francesco as a solution for the care of our common home. And that's a call for papers from various points of view, biblical point of view, ecological point of view, healthcare point of view, various different points of view, looking at the pandemic and as a crisis and trying to use the idea of the economy of Francesco and the care for our common home from Laudato Si as a sort of starting point for a response to the situation. So the calls are open now until 31st of March, and it would be wonderful for us to have people from UCU or from the other partner universities or people who are watching the conference now participating in them. So thank you, Volodymyr, for giving me the chance to speak about them.
No, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm just trying to see whether we have some questions from the audience. And well, here's a question from Victor Poletko. Let me check with you, Victor, whether you can ask that question, not by writing, but unmuting yourself. And if I may ask if I may ask to unmute, yeah, Victor Poletko, now you can.
Thank you very much. Am I audible now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for those observations. Extremely inspiring, though sometimes a little bit pessimistic, or maybe just my reading that is pessimistic, because
this is my fault.
Like
my fault.
Yeah, well, both you, Professor Casanova, and Sister Helen seem to, well, kind of pragmatically at least placing economics in the center of the stage, which is natural and reasonable, and this is what follows from what we see. But if so, then an effective climate action or effective social action would require that those agents who are involved in the system, they just need to act unreasonably. And this looks like very simple, but this is what those who indeed implement things like sustainable development goals into their agendas, they tacitly accept And so I'm wondering whether for both, again, environmental and social action to be effective, is it really necessary that we impose heavier restrictions on those agents involved in the system? And if so, then how would those restrictions in principle look like? Because we can think of different models. Professor Casanova earlier has mentioned that we need more effective institutions, more effective structures of global governance. Would you speculate on how those structures would look like, or maybe of the principles of how they would have to be devised? This is complex, but just wondering. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to add an optimist note to my old grumpy old man pessimist critique before, and it is that really the most important takeaway is this crisis gives us a window of opportunity to see things in a way we are not seeing, to judge and to act. At the global level, there is the moment of Pope Francis, and then there is the moment of Biden, a Catholic President of the United States, which is very much in tune with the Francis agenda. So there is a unique opportunity at the global governance level to think through these issues. But the idea is we need to think in a new ways, and we cannot simply, we have to renew institutions, because most of the global problems are global and cannot be solved by national states. The citizenship issue, of course, is very important, not only economics, we're also citizens. But the problem is that neither half of humanity cannot become laborers, and half of humanity cannot become citizens of the wealthy countries. So we need to create structures in which beyond citizenship and economic man, we create transnational structures to deal with global issues, environment, migration, pandemics, etc. And for this, again, it's not only from the top. We need to look from below, from the peripheries, to see what needs to be done.
Thank you.
If I may say, Volodymyr,
please go ahead.
From this wonderful book that many of us have been reading, the quote from Hölderlin, which is also very important for Heidegger, this quote: where the danger is, also grows the saving power. Where the danger is, also grows the saving power. So I think, to answer your question, sorry, I lost your name. Victor. That we need to face this problem really squarely, with honesty, without fear, and know that it's in this dire situation that the grace will come forward, the solution will come forward. If we try to run away from it and hide from it, this won't help us. So I think it's facing the darkness, in that sense, José's kind of pessimism, in inverted commas, is actually useful for us and good. But we face it with the idea that through facing it, we can get to a better position. And I want to say two things about that. First thing is, I think we really have to stop treating people who work in big businesses and in the economic sphere as somehow dirty and evil. They are just human beings, the same as we are, and they have not been given the right tools to work their economy properly. They don't understand what it means to respect dignity in the workplace. They've never been taught this sort of stuff. So the first thing is to really help them see what they want to see, what they would really want to see, because I think at the end of the day, we really are all human beings. There's something natural about, and Liz was saying that too. We're trying to achieve the good. We sometimes get really mixed up what it is. But if we can help each other on that level, we can really start to change the situation. And the other thing is what I was saying about technology, but it also applies to economics. If we go right back to Aristotle, he understood the problem that we can either have an economy that is part of a way of life, what he called the oikonomia, which is part of the house, the oikos, or we have an economy which just is a life of its own, the chrematistics that he would have talked about, which is it's out of control. Money is a really good servant and it's a terrible master. it has to be inserted into a way of life. And that's the institutional question, the institutions that Clemens were talking about, that need to be not humiliating, that need to be dignity literate. It's about supporting the small businesses that Oksana was talking about, the solidarity between businesses to really do what they want to do. One of the really good things you can do with people in business is, especially in the big businesses, get them to talk about why their business was founded. Get them to go back to the earliest stages. You will always find that there was somebody there trying to respond to a real problem, deal with a real issue, serve a real need, and to try to reconnect them to that original inspiration, to bring them back to that fullness of purpose and life that was there in the foundation. They just need to re-enliven it. So, I think by facing the darkness and facing this terrible, we can also have the means to grow into some really deep and great hope that we can find a solution to it. And of course, for those of us who are Christians, that isn't a surprise that that's the way things work. That's a sort of Christian mystery applied in our world today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for reminding us of that original inspiration, which is always there. Well, I think that with José's and Sister Helen's comments, we can enter it into a round of concluding comments or reflections from our participants. So I would invite Clemens and Liz and Oksana just to share with us your 1 minute conclusions.
1 minute conclusions. Okay. There are some schools that teach happiness, which is obviously a doubtful enterprise in itself. But what about thinking about teaching hope? Hope needs reasons, and it has to be doctor-based, justified hope. And we have some resources to look around. What are reasons to be hopeful in the future and for the future? We have the privilege of working with young people who bring a lot of hope to this planet, which Hannah Arendt called natality. So what I'm proposing as a conclusion is, why don't we teach a course, maybe together as a COP partnership or a cross-campus partnership, on hope, cultivating hope as something the university wants to bring to the world, as maybe an open source course where people can take the course without paying for it, as another role model. I have to leave in 1 minute, so thank you all, and thank you, Volodymyr, for having me on the panel.
All right, thank you so much. Oksana, would you like to share?
Yes, if I may, 1 minute. First thing, what the university need to do first, to be honest with itself. Because being open, being honest is something that is keeping this level of trust to the university. Leading by example. This is something that is really important in this world. The second, I think that we need to think more how to work with young people, with this generation, because, well, the generation gap has always been a problem. But now talking to young people who were born with smartphones in their hands is a completely different thing. How to translate all the important things about the dignity, about the virtues, to those who communicate in a completely different way. This is rather a challenge, but something we need to really think about. And another thing is about translating hope, and I agree about that. And that's something we experience here in Ukraine, dealing not just with the partners from academia, but we are working closely with different stakeholders. And that's the only context I will name business again. We work with business, we work with government. And we see this high demand for a bigger picture, for a vision that somebody can provide, some important pillars that this future vision can be built upon. This is really something that institutions, political, business, civil society is really expecting from Catholic University, and this is something that we can really be of service. And thank you to all wonderful distinguished speakers. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. And Liz, comment.
Look, I very much agree with Helen, Clemens, and Oksana. We have to provide a positive meaning and purpose of what the future could be. We need to have that inspirational vision, but we also, which gives people hope. If we have an inspirational vision that gives people hope, but that's not sufficient. What we need to do as part of the universities, of all the universities, is to agree to a sort of a roadmap on how to get there. We need to have alignment in the core areas that we're all going to agree that they are the essential components of creating that vision and providing hope. And the courses need to be around there. It's just not one course on hope. It is actually providing a roadmap on how to provide a better world, a better community, which has love in the core essence of its heart. So that's my 1 minute spiel. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I really thank you so much for being so kind of thoughtful, open in this discussion. It just occurred to my mind that all of us are in kind of very different time zones, right? I think it's the evening here in Europe. It's early morning, right?
It's 5:30 a.m. in the morning in Sydney. Yes.
Wow. And it's kind of midday in the United States. That somehow we're kind of able to capture what one man really can do that. I mean, it's like the whole day and night in complexity, being at kind of different locations. We seem to be kind of able to share that experience of the wholeness of which otherwise we wouldn't be able to achieve. Kind of interesting moment, which the kind of digital world gives us opportunity to share that experience. And I think that's a kind of very powerful metaphor, which conversation, community, and being in community, and being in solidarity, in fact, fulfills our lives and our beings, and we are able to become more through kind of a shared solidarity experience and being in relation, being in communication. And I think that this conference is just a very wonderful example that it can be that way, and that we can be academically as well, kind of moving along these lines and kind of bringing some real spirit in solidarity, in togetherness, in neighborliness, even if in kind of global, even on a global scale. And that's a wonderful experience. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for being so much dedicated and committed partners of this project, of this conference. And certainly, I'm sure we will be staying in touch and kind of fostering, developing our partnerships. Thank you very much. And we have to stop.